For those of people that don't know you, what's like the quick version of how you got started in real estate and your guidance counselor? I love hearing that story all the time.
Well, first I was born. I was lucky enough to be born into a family where no one had a job. There were no wage slaves. So I grew up seeing entrepreneurism around me. I grew up in a neighborhood, North Shore of Boston, where all the families around me were children and grandchildren of immigrants who came to the land of opportunity seeking to build a better life and then built it. And so all around me were examples of successful people, which inspired me. I read a lot. I used to read in order to defend myself from the public school teachers. So they'd be up there blabbing away, and I could sit in the back with a good book. And I would learn things that were important to me. And then what Rich was referring to, when I was in high school, I got talking to the guidance counselor. And the guidance counselor said to me, "What do you want to be after you graduate?" And I said, "Unemployed." And she wasn't prepared for that answer. And so she called the principal. The principal called my parents. And I had to explain that being unemployed did not mean I was studying to become a hobo. It meant that I planned to have enough assets to provide me with enough income that I never had to raise my hand and ask permission ever again. And so I went ahead with that plan. And when I got out of high school, I got a real estate license, and I told everyone that I knew that I had to get enough property, and I planned to get enough property to provide me with enough rent so I could do whatever I damn well pleased for the rest of my life. And I told people that so they could help me. And one of the things that I've discovered is really important is that you ask for help and you help if you want to be successful. And you have to do both of those things. It's not enough to just help people, and it's not enough to just ask for help. You have to do both of those things. And in asking people to help me and to call me and to tell me about opportunities and to tell others about what I was looking for, enabled me to set a table for myself where I went out into the world trying to sell real estate, borrowing my dad's car to show real estate because I didn't have a car. And I earned $4,000 my first year out of high school. I was making offers to buy real estate. So now picture this. Here's an 18-year-old kid who's a high school graduate, or at least it's rumored he's a high school graduate. And I look like I'm 14, and I'm unemployed because I don't have a W-2 job. And do you know my first 200 offers that I wrote trying to acquire a property? Not one of those closed.
Question for you: When your parents, what was your parents' reaction? Like, did they walk in laughing?
No, my parents came in. I was blessed. My parents listened to me. They sometimes listened and then laughed, but they listened. And that was really important. And that was part of what built this enormous ego that believes I have opinions and everyone should listen to me. And that was a major important part of my growing up. The fact that my parents around the table listened, and then my sister, and then my sister and my brother, and then my sister and my brother and my other sisters all listened. And we listened to one another, and we disagreed. Imagine that. but we listened. That was really, really important. My mom and dad came in, and I explained my side of the thing, and I didn't go on a rant about the victims of government schools. I kept my mouth shut at that level and just told them what I wanted. And my parents supported me while trying to correct me along the way. After 200 offers, many of them had, well, some of them had been accepted, but none of them closed. One day I got a phone call from a gentleman who owned a really, really nice triplex in a great neighborhood, walking distance to the beaches and walking distance to downtown. It was a great property. And he said, "Are you still wanting to buy a property?" And I said, "Well, of course I am. What's up?" And he said, "I've been offered a job in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and it's a tremendous opportunity for me. And I want to go. I need to be there very shortly. I need to sell this house." Because my first question to him was, why would you sell a nice house like this? And that house, where he lived on the first floor and had 2 incomes from upstairs, was a terrific investment as well as home. But he was going to Fort Lauderdale, and the house, his home being 1,400 miles from work, was inconvenient. And so while the house was growing in value, to him it was turning from what should have been a valued asset in my eyes into an anchor in his eyes. And it was a tremendous opportunity for me because he had a first mortgage on the property and a second mortgage on the property. Now picture this. I'm a self-employed / unemployed realtor. I don't qualify for a loan through any institution on earth. And so being able to buy a property with an existing first mortgage and an existing second mortgage and no due on sale clause in the loans, was that important for me? Enormously important. And he wanted $3,500, which was his $3,000 that he had invested in the house 18 months earlier, and $500 in closing costs. And I could take title subject to the mortgages. That meant he wasn't giving me free and clear property. He was giving me property with title flaws. The title flaws were a first mortgage to Beverly Savings Bank and a second mortgage to Beverly Savings Bank. And so I had saved $1,900 in my 2 years. So I had $1,900 cash. So the first thing I did is go back to him and say, "Listen, I'll pay you the $3,000 and I'll pay the $500 in closing costs. But I'm going to have to do it this way. I'll give you $1,400 in cash and I'll pay the closing costs. And I'll give you my promise that I'll give you the other $1,600 as soon as I possibly can." Now, why did I tell him that I would give him a promise? It was his problem. He wanted to sell the property. I wanted to buy the property. And so offering him all the cash I had and offering him a promise was the best I could do. And what do you think he said? Absolutely not. Said, "I want my money, and I want to go to Fort Lauderdale." So now, I'm buying a property, good collateral. How many people do you think were willing to make me a third mortgage loan to a 19-year-old unemployed realtor? You know who the only person was who'd make me that loan? My parents. And I negotiated one of my first private notes and one of my best private notes. I borrowed $1,600 from my parents with no payments, no interest, no due date, no collateral, and no note. Now, was that a good deal?
Yes.
With that money, I bought my first property. And that property made a friend of Albert who sold me the house. I helped him out. My parents got to show their faith in me, which was enormously important to me. And I got to begin a relationship with the local savings bank, because now I'm the one paying them. Do you think that was important to me? See, because back then you could walk in downtown and talk to the banker that was lending their money.
Pete, real quick, while you're talking about it, you said something last night about the golden rule and listening to what. It's not about what you want.
It's not about.
Can you repeat that? Do you remember what you said last night?
Oh, I certainly remember. Anybody here ever go to Sunday school?
Yeah.
2 of you, great.
It's California.
Does anybody know what the golden rule is? It's not he who has the gold rules. That's not it. Nobody ever heard do unto others? None of you paid attention in Sunday school? Do unto others
Everybody whispered it.
as you would have them do unto you. That is a terrible rule. That is a terrible rule. Because think for a minute. What you want doesn't consider what they want. So what the golden rule is, if you're an investor, if you're a negotiator, if you're a business person, if you even just care about other people, it's do unto others as they would have you do unto them. And I think what Rich was asking about when he talked about what I mentioned last night at a Bill Tan's meeting, and we were talking about this, and I said, you know, I knew a young man who I got a great house for, and he had a very nice 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,000-square-foot house that he had a payment of $635 PITI on. That was a great deal. It was less than rent. And he called me one day and said, I need to get a better house. And I said, why? And he said, well, my fiance thinks we deserve a better house. And so the better house that he wanted, or that they wanted, was 2.5 times as expensive as the house they had, and was much bigger than the house they had. But the 2-bedroom, 2-bath is adequate for most couples, in my view. In whose view was it not adequate? The fiance. So now, I helped him get the next house. And I bought his 2-bedroom house with the $635 payments from him in order to help him get his next house. And he was happy. But if I had applied the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do, what would I have done were I in his situation? Got rid of the fiance and kept the house. But that was not what he wanted, and that was not what he did. In the instance of the house that I bought, the first house I bought, had I been on the other side, I would never sold that great property in that great neighborhood with that great financing already in place. But he wanted to get his $3,000 back so he could go where his future was calling him. And so recognize it's very important that you discover what uncomfortable circumstance that the people have that's causing them to have a house available for you to buy or to negotiate on. Your job is to resolve or help resolve or make better the uncomfortable circumstances that are causing the sale. That means you've got to discover what the uncomfortable circumstances are. And then your job is to create a potential position that's better than their existing position.
Yeah, and I was telling you last night too that like there was one of the members was asking me for a formula for sub 2. Like, you know, we have the flipping formula, 70% minus repairs and all that. So, but he's asking for a sub 2 formula. And what would you think there's a sub 2 formula?
I think that the formula is you look not for funds ever. You look for people who have a problem. And your job is to help them resolve that problem. Now, I was sitting in McDonald's with an old man. And I knew that he was old until I caught up with him age-wise. And he had a great big 3-bedroom, 2-bath house he lived in all by himself. And he lived on his income from the notes that he had invested in over his lifetime. And he'd been a real estate investor over his lifetime and owned some great properties. And I had done a lot of business with him over the years. But he said to me that he needed more income and he wanted to get his costs down because some of his notes had paid off. Why do you think notes paid off? They amortized out to zero. What happened during 21 and 22?
Oh, people refied.
People refied and so they paid him off. And so his income was dropping, and it had dropped from $7,000 a month to $1,800 a month. And he had a big 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage house on a great big lot where he lived by himself. And I traded him right there in McDonald's notes that I had that paid $1,000 a month for the equity in his house subject to the mortgage. What did that mean?
You take over the existing loan and you gave them the notes to pay up the equity.
I didn't take over anything. I bought a property that had a title flaw, had an issue. It was not fee simple. It was not free and clear. That's the way all real estate closes in America. Has anybody here ever bought a piece of real estate? When you bought that, it was subject to, wasn't it? Every one of them was. When you buy property, don't you buy it subject to the unpaid taxes for 2024? Now, that doesn't mean you're personally liable for that, but it does mean the seller disclosed to you that you're taking the risk. They're not giving you perfect title. They're giving you title subject to the unpaid taxes. And if you don't pay the taxes, what can happen? The government can steal your property. And then they say, and you're taking title subject to the utility easements across your lot. And you know that, and you're used to that. Well, sometimes you take title subject to an existing mortgage, or an example of my first property, 2 existing mortgages. In this case, I would buy it subject to the mortgage. I didn't think a thing about it. Why? The first mortgage holder was an investor that was a friend of mine. Is that different than it being a pretender lender? See, and so it depends. There are times when I do a subject to without thinking about it, without hesitation. And there are other times when I'm very concerned about it. But subject to is an opportunity, but right now, what's happening? Are there very low rates out there for loans?
No.
You don't think those loans that we saw in the last 5 years were low?
Oh,
They were low, but what's that done?
Made people not want to
It's
sell.
cost us our inventory because those people are holding those properties and they're not coming to market. And so while you might get an opportunity to buy one subject to and you might be willing to do it, you got to recognize the minimized inventory makes real estate prices more difficult and opportunities more difficult because people don't want to give up that rate. But I bought my first property subject to a first, subject to a second. The second was a home improvement loan, and it was $3,000 second, payable $100 a month at 6% and until paid. So what did that mean? When I bought the house, Albert had already owned the house and made payments on that second for almost 18 months. So there were only 20 months left on that second mortgage, which I took subject to. But I bought the property. The property went from his name to my name. Because I was 20 and I was single. And if I owned that property, it was my property. If I got killed, my will would have willed the property to my sisters and my brother, and they would have owned it subject to the mortgage. So it was my house. And I stood on the front porch and waved at people and said, see this? It's mine. I told you I could do this. It was a big deal for me. But I made the payments at the Beverly Savings Bank. And how did I make the payments? I rented the property. The tenants paid me for the use and enjoyment of that house. I took the payments from the tenants and I paid the taxes and the maintenance and the cleaning and the advertising, and I paid the first and second mortgage. Now back then, I could send first class postage for 5 cents. Did I do that? I walked in the front door of the bank and paid the mortgage. Why did I do that?
relationships.
So they knew that it was my house and I was paying them. And then 20 months went by. And one day I got a letter from the Beverly Savings Bank. And it said, "Dear preferred customer." That was me. The kid who got out of high school, who went into real estate, who made 200 offers without getting a closing. I'm getting a letter from a bank in my hometown saying, "Dear preferred customer." And what were they doing? Sending me the paid note. And what did I do? Do you think I had a mortgage burning ceremony where I burnt it? I took that note and I put it in a file folder and I kept it. Then later, I put it up in a frame over my desk. But then, a year later, I had a chance to buy a house for 80 cents on a dollar. The trouble was, it was an all-cash deal. And except for the cash, I had everything it took to buy that house. And so I reread the letter that the Beverly Savings Bank had sent me, and it said, "Dear preferred customer, congratulations on your good credit. Here's the paid note. If you ever need money for a worthwhile investment, like a boat or a new car, come and see us." I ran up to the bank, stood there in front of the vice president of the bank and said, "Here I am, your preferred customer, and I don't want a boat, and I don't want a car. I want to buy this property." and I need 20 grand to buy the property. And I was looking at the bank to be the sucker who provided the cash to make that deal. And lo and behold, they lent me 100% of the purchase price because it appraised for 125% of the loan. So they lent me that, and I bought another triplex. Now, I own a triplex that has a payment of $225 a month on it. I'm earning $11,000 a year. Can I afford $225? Hell no. I had to get tenants in that house. And the tenants paid me, and I paid the expenses, and I took $225 and paid the bank, and it broke even. Those tenants were buying a house for me and later for my family. Anytime you can get another person to buy a house for you, that's a good thing. They should be encouraged. So picture this, it's a break even. Now, that was 1970. Over the next 5 years, well, first of all, in 71, anybody ever hear of a guy named Richard Nixon? What did he do in 71? Took us off the gold standard, said money no longer is money. It's now a piece of paper that the government says is valuable, and to make you feel it's valuable, they printed on the back of it, "In God We Trust." And so now you've got paper that they can print, and as the counterfeiter, the government gets to spend it first at its highest value, and then the extra money goes into the money supply, and everybody else has more expensive goods and services to pay for with the inflated dollars.
And now they don't even print it.
No, now they don't even need paper. They can't afford the paper anymore. Now they just say, magic, they widen the Excel spreadsheet. Say, look at that, we got more dollars.
0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Just keep moving that Excel spreadsheet. The edge keeps going out. But what happened is that happened in 81, in 71. Now my house, did my expenses go up with inflation? Did my taxes go up? My insurance, the oil bill, everything went up. Did my rents go up? What didn't go up? The note, the 225 to the lender, the sucker in the deal who puts up the money, enabling us to profit.
Who wants to be a lender?
we go to exchanges at Denny's, and Ed Middlebrook's at the meeting. He keeps saying, "Would you stop calling them suckers? These guys are carrying carrying mortgages for me."
There was a lot of money on the board at Exchangers today.
In 5 years, I had a positive cash flow because all my expenses had gone up, all my rents had gone up, but one expense, the 225, hadn't gone up. And suddenly I had a positive cash flow. Then in 1980, anybody ever hear about what happened in 1979, 80? Inflation got a little out of hand. Prime rates hit 18%. One of my favorite HUD-1s. I got a HUD-1 at my house for a VA loan from some patriot who went to Vietnam for 2 tours, and they rewarded him for his sacrifice by allowing him to buy a house with no money down, and they arranged VA financing at 16.5% interest for 30 years and 7 points. I mean, you just government, just such a wonderful institution. Anyway, so in 1980, with all that inflation, with all those high interest rates, now what happened with the interest rates going from 8 in 1977 to 18 in 1980? Prices went up. Interest rates did not cause prices to go down. prices doubled from the time Nixon took them off the gold standard to 1980. Now, I've got my property and suddenly I've got $500 a month in cash flow. Because what didn't go up?
Your note.
The mortgage payment. And then 5 more years, everything went up except the mortgage payment. And then in 1995, I collected all that expanded rent and I paid all the expenses, but what didn't I have to pay? The mortgage anymore, because their mortgage had run out and we had a free and clear property, which the tenants paid for us. And the lender took all the risk and put up all the money. And in our market, that's what we do. When I'm in the booklet for the weekend, one of the things I got is an example of a house we bought subject to a 10% institutional debt. And we refinanced it, got rid of that institution, replacing it with private. And then we refinanced it at a lower payment. And then we refinanced it and drew out $45,000 that we used to buy 3 more houses. And then we refinanced it and put new roofs and new kitchens in some of our existing houses. And then we refinanced it. And now the debt on the property is 4 times what the debt was we took subject to. And the house barely breaks even. But our investment portfolio, what's happened to houses in the 2014 to 2024 10-year period when we were doing this? They doubled and redoubled, and the houses we bought are positively cash flowing. And so that subject to enable us to get the asset. But that doesn't mean you have to keep that subject to debt in place. Did any of you guys know Bill Broadbent? No. Broadbent was a great investor, mentor, realtor, exchanger out here in California. And in 1997, I bought a house in Largo, Florida from a lady who was moving out of Florida because it was too tough living in Florida, and she wanted to go someplace where she could live on her minimum income better. So she left Florida and she went to Arkansas. She sold me her house subject to the mortgage, institutional mortgage. Then, after a couple years, she sent me a letter and said, "Too tough in Arkansas, I'm moving to California." She moved to California. In 2004, 7 years after she sold us the house, what do you think happened? She declared bankruptcy. She wrote to us, "Dear Mr. Fortunato, I'm going through a bankruptcy. The bankruptcy trustee and the bankruptcy court want to know, when I don't pay any of my bills, why my house in Florida, my second home, is always paid and is paid current." And she said, "I told them it's not my house. I sold it to Mr. Fortunato." What do you think the bankruptcy court said? "Of course it's your house. Don't you tell us. Your name's on the mortgage. You must own the house." Now, think of how it feels to get a letter saying the bankruptcy court has decided they want all your equity. What happened to my house that I bought in 97 by 2004? It had more than doubled. So where I started out with next to no equity subject to, suddenly I've got 70 grand in equity. But the bankruptcy court is suggesting they think it's theirs. Now, if we get in a legal tussle, who is going to win that tussle?
Pete
The
Fortunato.
bankruptcy court or me? Every time I go and talk to a judge and try to explain how he's wrong, I get charged with contempt. So no matter how earnestly I try to correct them, it doesn't work. But they're there in these positions and they don't know the difference between a deed and a mortgage. And we know this is trouble. And Bill Broadbent, as I was whining to him one day about this, said, I know an attorney who actually knows the difference between a mortgage and a deed. And he is connected, so he'll go and talk to the bankruptcy court. And Bill's attorney charged us $1,000 in 2004 and went in and showed the judge and the bankruptcy trustee that indeed it was not her property, nor was it their property, it was my property. But I was lucky, very lucky in that situation. That Bill Broadbent helped me out and saved me the equity in a real nice house. That, by the way, we still have. But after I finally paid that first $3,000 note, I then started to save my notes. And I would say to people, when they said, why should I trust you? Because my most common currency that I use to buy a house is a promise. I trade promises for deeds. You can trade promises for deeds. That is the best currency you can use. When I bought the house subject to the mortgage, what promise did I offer to Albert? I will make those payments and protect your credit. When I bought the next house, I made a promise to Doris that I would pay her $850 a month for the next 20 years in return for her triplex. When I bought the house from John Pochas, I bought it subject to a first mortgage and I gave him a second mortgage. So I promised to protect his credit on the first and I promised to pay the payments on the second, and then I rented the house to tenants who promised to pay me in exchange for the enjoyment of the house, and they paid me and I paid those mortgages. And not only did I build a relationship with the lender that was a portfolio lender in the community, but I built a relationship with John Pochas, who I bought that property from. And when that was 1970, John and I, in the next 30 years, did 27 transactions together. That's how valuable that relationship was. And it started with a promise. And then it was again and again and again promises made to each other as we helped one another. And when he passed away in June of 2001, we had 27 transactions that we had done, each of us together. And we had 4 transactions I'd done with his son-in-law. And we had 10 transactions we'd done with the banker he'd introduced us to. And we had uncountable referrals. And so when you start doing business and you understand, you start acquiring your portfolio, the most important thing you're developing in every deal is the ally who you do business with and who you help. So